Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and of course a new Elden Ring video. With our recent patch 1.09, we're covering the major changes and how things currently line up in this patch with the boss weapons this time. These are the Remembrance boss weapons to be specific, and these are my top 10 picks out of all of them. We're going to work our way from the bottom to the top, starting with 10, which is going to be the Dragon King's Cragblade. This once absolute monster of a weapon has been taking some serious hits patch after patch after patch. For whatever reason, they really don't like thrusting weapons, especially in PvP. A major nerf to that in the previous patch was a PvP specific nerf of reducing thrusting weapon counterattack damage. Further, heavy thrusting swords have taken a lot of hits with their jump attacks and various movesets, and in our current patch 1.09 they got more nerfs. The hitbox size of various attacks, say with heavy thrusting swords, that is reduced too. About the only love this thing's seen is some better control over how you use the Ash of War and the turn rate on that. And while even after all of these changes and nerfs, I think it's still a good weapon, it's noticeably weaker than what it was, so it barely scratches the list at the 10th spot at this point. For number 9, it's the Sacred Relic Sword, which is doing okay in this patch. While the Ash of War is obviously a rune farming machine and works well in PvE when you're not dealing with wholly resistant enemies, of course there are the negatives. For example, the end game of the current version of the game is basically all holy enemies, so you're not going to do much damage with that. Further, in PvP, you're never going to land that Ash of War really in a 1v1. It's so obvious, it's slow, it's very easy to avoid. Where it is relevant, of course, is free for all in the Colosseum, where you're off screen sending it out like crazy. However, that was specifically nerfed as well this patch. They've decreased the damage and poise damage in PvP of the Wave of Gold skill. So this Ash of War, when hitting an opponent over a certain distance, is just no longer as effective. So specifically, they have targeted this weapon in free-for-all where they're doing these long-range aspects. You can still do the rune farming and long-range Ash spam, that still works great, but it's interesting to see how they've targeted this weapon and made it just noticeably weaker where it was ultimately the strongest. It is a great sword though, and there have been some slight improvements to that weapon type, increased speed, range, and recovery time, which feels very nice. Definitely still a good weapon and useful in those specific scenarios, but noticeably changed and nerfed this patch. Next then, we have the Hand of MALENIA. This katana is not quite the same as, say, a Nagakiba, with slightly worse scaling and about the same range and capabilities. It's not a bad katana by any means. The problem is you can't really change its affinity, so we can't get that scaling better, we can't go further into bleed or occult. It's a bit of an awkward one, but there is kind of that ultimate potential of successive attacks with its awesome Ash of War, the Waterfowl Dance. We cannot deny that if you can get that combo off, if someone's taking that many successive hits, your AR skyrockets, the damage is crazy, you burst them and blast them. That works great in certain scenarios where you're able to time those punishes with that Ash of War well. Mixing and matching this katana with Power Stance is probably a good idea. Further, in 1.09, they improved the running attack speed and recovery time of katanas as a whole, so they're feeling just that little bit smoother and that little bit better. Moving on though, at number 7, we have the STARSCOURGE Greatswords, which, to my surprise, have been improved this patch in a pretty major way. The Ash of War, the Starcaller Cry. That's always been an awesome Ash of War, pulling people in, doing pretty good damage at that, and reasonable range, very nice in PvP. And then the follow-up Slam, which comes out a bit slow, often interrupted in PvE because you might not have enough hyper armor to take a boss hit during that slow Ash animation, or they just roll it in PvP because it's obvious what's happening. That has been improved. The speed of the follow-up attack, so the pull-in, and then the slam part, that's faster now, which makes a major difference in its capabilities in both sides of the game. When it comes to PvE, that means you can get away with using the full Ash of War combo much more consistently, especially in boss fights where you might be knocked out of it before. In PvP, it just means that it's a bit more threat when you do it, and while still predictable and still dodgeable, it's noticeably better in this patch. I wasn't expecting to see this one see that kind of love, but I'm happy to see it. You can enhance the Starcaller Cry though with the, say, Raw Talisman, and get the damage on that thing really good, so the fact that it's faster just means the DPS of this weapon, thanks to its Ash of War, is better. So number 7 feels fair because it's more universally good than, say, Hand of MALENIA. At number 6 though, we have the Axe of Godfrey. Better than it once was. It was once a very disappointing weapon, and now it feels really good. The damage you can get with the Regal Raw, and enhancing that with a different Raw enhancing abilities and talismans, you can make it do an absolute truck ton of damage. Like 1k a hit or more, that's extremely dangerous. Once you've done the initial Regal Raw, you've activated a Warcry, your AR's higher, and you've unlocked a new moveset with your heavy attacks. The starting combo of that is a smaller slam down AoE, then an uppercut sort of swipe with the axe, which is mega quick. The follow-up to that is another heavy attack, which is a charged up, slower hitting thing, which is unlikely to ever land, certainly not not in PvP, but you can entirely rely on that quick stamp and then uppercut combo as it's so effective, so much damage, and so fast. You could do that, roll out of it, do it again, roll out of it, do it again. And this can be an incredibly good DPS, very powerful combo in boss fights, and majorly scary to deal with in PvP because it's really hard to trade with. I don't really put this weapon higher on this list because, you know, that's kind of a bland way to play, isn't it? Just relying on one single attack. But the power of the weapon can't really be denied anymore. As a colossal weapon, the poise ability it has is great now. The raw damage with the AR is going to be good. Steadily, we've seen weapons of this nature be improved, and it's very nice to see. So I think it's in a very good place now. Unlike number 5, MOHGWYN'S Sacred Spear, which is much worse than it once was. Now, in the previous patch, they reduced the size of the actual ritual, the Ash of War, so the red AoE around you that causes the bleed, that's no longer as far-reaching. Still very good reach, though, still a wide-reaching ability. The problem is that they keep reducing the power of thrusting weapons, as I mentioned earlier. So in PvP, thrusting weapon counterattack damage, that's so much lower, and it was a big part of the damage you do with a weapon like this. As a great spear, though, they've nerfed it pretty hard again. 1.09 saw a decrease in the hitbox size for some of the attacks for great spear specifically. And as a bleed weapon, you're often doing a bleed build, and bleed builds have been nerfed this patch as well. You get less AR when you get a bleed proc while White Mask and Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman is equipped. So across the board, this weapon type and this weapon and bleed build in general, it's weaker. Why is it still number 5? Because you can do all these things and it's still ultimately like a great spear with great range, great damage, bleed potential, fire damage, ridiculous bleed build up on that Ash of War. All of it's weaker than it once was, but that doesn't mean it's still not good. Previously, I reckon this would have been maybe number 3 on this list. Now it's down to number 5 because of these changes. So number 4. MALIKETH'S Black Blade. As a colossal sword, we've seen some great improvements to this moveset, the poise potential, the speed of attacks, which has been incredible. They're heavy, hard-hitting, staggering weapons, and they feel great with their long range. The thing that was nerfed heavily about them, the crouch poke, that was walked back majorly, so the crouch poke might not be as broken as it once was, but it's still a viable attack and very threatening as a roll catch in PvP. As a weapon, this one specifically has Destined Death on the Ash of War, of course, which is a 10% health reduction debuff. It does damage on hit and damage over time. It's incredibly powerful as an effect. The Ash attack also has hyper armor. It's a 3-part attack where you swing around and hit, then a downward slam and hit, and then there's the AoE of the Destined Death further. That makes it really, really good in trade because of the armor and protection, meaning it's great for use in both sides of the content. This weapon is just in a really good place. But now we've got to talk about number 3, which honestly we'll be pretty quick on. The Carian Regal Scepter is not something I can really talk about too much. It is ultimately just a staff for your sorcery use. scaling intelligence, and very useful at that. Empowering your moon sorcery and not charging you extra FP to do any of it. If you're trying to do the most damage with your sorcery, you're going to want to take the staff that does cost more FP when casting spells but increases your damage further, or perhaps you do something like the Prince of Death, you know, depending on what sorceries you are using. As a weapon, you do get that Ash of War where you spin the staff around for DPS, but it's rarely ever used. It's just a very useful scepter, one of the best for sorcery builds. So still an undeniably useful and good boss weapon. Now we come to number 2, which I'm quite excited to talk about. MORGOTT'S Cursed Blade. This is so much better this patch. It comes down to 2 aspects of major buff in 1.09. The Cursed Blood Slash, the Ash of War, that now has increased projectile generation speed and recovery time, which is absolutely major. I'll get into it in a sec. Basically, the Ash of War on the strike has that follow-up sort of explosive Cursed Blood pop that comes out faster and is actually catching people now very consistently, even if they roll the physical attack. It combos incredibly well now into itself, but further, as a curved greatsword, there's been a major buff to the speed of attacks, range of attacks, and recovery time of attacks for that weapon type. What this has created is almost a true combo with this weapon in particular. If you do a light attack or running light attack, then use the Ash of War, you will combo into each other so quickly that it's very hard to deal with. The generation of the projectile, that comes out quick and catches people further. Then you do another light attack, interrupting your own Ash of War, hitting them when they're expecting to be, you know, not vulnerable. You can follow that with another Ash of War and another light and another Ash of War. And the Ash of War steps forward an impressive amount, meaning this is an absolute machine of a combo in PvP. I have been absolutely bewildered by how much better this weapon feels just at a mechanical level, and it's made a major impact in its PvP ability. This weapon is really good now. The only real downside to this is, yes, technically it's a bleed weapon, and that has been reduced in power in the bleed builds, but the massive mechanical improvement to this weapon weapon cannot be understated. I really recommend you give it a try if you haven't. But now, number one, where I really can't talk about it much because no one wants to hear it anymore, I'm sure. Number one is Blasphemous Blade, arguably the best weapon in the game, so of course it's still the best boss weapon, and yes, it's better this patch. As a greatsword movesets have improved speed, improved range, and improved recovery time. For some reason, this is the best weapon in the game overall because of all the stuff that it has, and they made it better this patch, which they did like the previous patch and the previous patch before that. Very quickly, just to validate this, it is a weapon that has lifesteal on damage, lifesteal on kill, it has fire damage and physical damage, which is incredible. Its Ash of War is one of the best in the game because it's got incredibly long range and it's wide as hell. It knocks people over in PvP as well as doing a load of damage and penetrates through targets, so you can hit like infinite targets with this Ash of War. It's a free-for-all machine. It's incredible in 1v1s. It's insane in basically every build that it's in, especially in PvE. It's just the most overpacked weapon that keeps getting better for some reason. So yeah, it's still number one. But there you have it. Those are our 10 best Remembrance boss weapons. Things have certainly changed this patch, with some falling quite down the ranks and some jumping massively up. I can't wait for patch 1.10 where Blasphemous Blade is buffed again. Let me know your thoughts on this list though, if there's anything I should have included, but I hope this was interesting or useful to you. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.